Welcome back to the tale of Despereaux. We left with Despereaux talking to the king, trying to convince the king that he knew where Princess P had been taken, and he knew that Roscuro had hatched this plan with Miggery Sow, and he knew where to find the princess, but the king wouldn't listen. So Despereaux decides that he has to be the knight in shining armor of his dream. He knew that he had to save the day. Let's see if he does. Chapter 42. The threadmaster was sitting atop his spool of thread, swinging his tail back and forth and eating a piece of celery. "Well, look here," he said when he saw Despereaux. "Would you just look at that? It's the mouse who loved a human princess, back from the dungeon in one piece. The old threadmaster would say that I didn't do my job well. That because you're still alive, I must have tied the thread incorrectly. But it is not so. And how do I know it is not so? Because the thread is still around your neck." He nodded. He took a bite of his celery. "I need the rest of it," said Despereaux. "The rest of what? Your neck?" "The rest of the thread." "Well, I can't just hand it over to any old mouse," said the threadmaster. "They say red thread is special, sacred. Though, I myself, after having spent so much time with it, know it is what it is." "What is it?" said Despereaux. "Thread," said the threadmaster. He shrugged and took another loud bite of celery. "Nothing more, nothing less. But I pretend, friend, I pretend, and what may I ask do you intend to do with the thread?" "I'm going to save the princess." "It seems..." "Save the princess?" "Oh, yes, the princess, the beautiful princess. That's how this whole story started, isn't it?" said the threadmaster. "I have to save her. There's no one to do it but me." "It seems to be that way with most things. No one to do the really disagreeable jobs except for oneself. And how exactly will you use a spool of thread to save the princess?" asked the threadmaster. "A rat has taken her and hidden her in the dungeon, so I have to go back to the dungeon, and it is full of twists and turns and hidden chambers." "Like a maze," said the threadmaster. Yes, like a maze, and I have to find my way to her, wherever she is hidden, and then I have to lead her back out again, and the only way to do that is with the thread. Gregory the jailer tied a rope around his ankle so that he would not get lost." As the mouse said this, he shuddered, thinking of Gregory and his broken rope, dying, lost in the darkness. "I," said Despereaux, "I will use the thread." The threadmaster nodded. I see, he said. He took a meditative bite of celery. "You, my friend, are on a quest." "I don't know what that is," said Despereaux. "You don't have to know. You just have to feel compelled to do the impossible, important task at hand." "Impossible," said Despereaux. "Impossible," said the threadmaster. "Important." He sat chewing his celery and staring somewhere past Despereaux, and then suddenly he leapt off his spool. "Who am I to stand in the way of a quest?" he said. "Roll her away." "I can have it?" "Yeah, you can have it for your quest." Despereaux put his front paws up and touched the spool. He gave it an experimental push forward. "Thank you," he said, looking into the eye of the threadmaster. I don't know your name." "Hovus." "Thank you, Hovus." "There's something else, something that belongs with the thread." Hovus went into the corner and came back with a needle. "You can use it for protection." "Like a sword," said Despereaux. "Like a knight would have." "Yes," said Hovus. He gnawed off a length of thread and used it to tie the needle around Despereaux's waist. "Like so." "Thank you, Hovus," said Despereaux. He put his right shoulder against the spool of thread and pushed it forward again. "Wait," said Hovus. He stood up on his hind legs and put his paws on Despereaux's shoulders and leaned in close to him. Despereaux smelled the sharp, clean scent of celery as the threadmaster bent his head, took hold of the thread around Despereaux's neck in his sharp teeth, and pulled on it hard. "There," said Hovus, when the piece of thread broke and dropped to the ground. "Now you're free. You see, you're not going to be going into the dungeon because you have to. You're going because you choose to." "Yes," said Despereaux, "I'm on a quest." The words felt good and right in his mouth. Quest. Say it, my friends. Say the word quest out loud. It is an extraordinary word, isn't it? So small and yet so full of wonder, so full of hope. Goodbye, said Hovis, as Despereaux pushed a spool of thread out of the threadmaster's hole. I've never known a mouse who has made it out of the dungeon only to go back into it again. Goodbye, friend. Goodbye, mouse. Among mice. Here we have a picture of Despereaux with Hovis, the threadmaster, with the needle and the spool of thread pushing it out the hole. Chapter 43. That night, Despereaux rolled the thread from the threadmaster's lair along innumerable hallways and down 3 flights of stairs. My friends, allow me to put this in perspective for you. Your average house mouse, or castle mouse if you will, weighs somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 ounces. Despereaux, as you well know, was in no way average. In fact, he was so incredibly small that he weighed about half of what an average mouse weighs. He weighed 2 ounces. That is all. Think about it. He was nothing but 2 ounces of mouse pushing a spool of thread that weighed almost as much as he did. Honestly, my friends, what do you think the chances are of such a small mouse succeeding in his quest? Zip. 0. Nada. Goose eggs. But you must, when you're calculating the odds of the mouse's success, factor in his love for the princess. Love, as we have already discussed, is a powerful, wonderful tool. Ridiculous thing, capable of moving mountains, and spools of thread even. Even with the love and purpose in his heart, Despereaux was very, very tired. When he reached the door to the castle kitchen at midnight, his paws were shaking, his muscles were jumping, and the place where his tail should be was throbbing. And he still had very, very long way left to go into the kitchen and down the many stairs of the dungeon, and then through somehow, some way, through the rat-filled darkness of the dungeon itself, not knowing where he was going. And oh, my friends, when he stopped to consider what lay ahead of him, Despereaux was filled with an icky feeling, a feeling of despair. He leaned his head against the spool of thread, and he smelled celery there, and he thought of Hovis and how Hovis seemed to believe in him and his quest. So the mouse raised his head and squared his shoulders and pushed the spool of thread forward again into the kitchen, where he saw, too late, that there was a light burning. Despereaux froze. Cook was in the kitchen. She was bent over the stove. She was stirring something. Was it a sauce? No. Was it a stew? No. What Cook was stirring was soup, my friends. Soup. The king's own castle. Against the king's laws. Right under the king's very nose. Cook was making soup. As the mouse looked on, Cook put her face into the steam rising from the pot and took a deep breath. She smiled a beatific smile, and steam rose around her and caught the light of the candle and made a halo over her head. Despereaux knew how Cook felt about mice in her kitchen. He remembered quite clearly her instructions to Mig regarding himself. Kill him! The only good mouse is a dead mouse, but he had to go through Cook's kitchen to get to the dungeon door, and he had no time to waste. Soon daylight would dawn and the whole castle would be awake, and a mouse would have no chance at all pushing a spool of thread across the floor without attracting a great deal of attention. He would have to sneak past the mouse-hating Cook, and he would have to do it now. And so, screwing his courage to the sticking place, Despereaux leaned against the spool of thread and set it rolling across the floor. Cook turned from the stove, a dripping spool in her hand and a frightened look on her face, and shouted, "Who's there?" Chapter 44. "Who's there?" shouted Cook again. Despereaux wisely said nothing. The kitchen was silent. "Humph," said Cook. "Nothing. It's nothing at all. Just my nerves. Just my nervous Nelly ears playing tricks on me. You're an old fool," she said to herself as she turned back to the stove. "You're just an old fool, afraid of being caught making soup." Despereaux slumped against the spool of thread, and as he leaned there, his heart was pounding, his paws shaking, a small, wonderful something occurred. A midnight breeze entered the kitchen and danced over to the stove and picked up the scent of the soup and then swirled across the floor and delivered the smell right directly to the mouse's nose. Despereaux put his head up in the air. He sniffed. He sniffed some more. He had never in his life smelled anything so lovely, so inspiring. With each sniff he took, he felt himself growing stronger and braver. Cook leaned in close to the kettle and put the spoon in and took the spoon out and blew upon the spoon and then brought it to her lips and sipped. She said. She took another sip. Missing something, she said. More salt, maybe. She put the spoon down and took up an enormous shaker and sprinkled salt into the kettle. And Desperauex, feeling emboldened by the smell of the soup, again set to work pushing the spool of thread. Quickly, he said to himself, rolling the spool across the floor. Do it quickly. Do not think. Just push. Cook whirled the salt shaker in her hand and shouted, Who goes there? Desperauex stopped pushing. He hid behind the spool of thread, and as Cook took the handle from the stove and held it high, Humph, she said. The candlelight came closer, closer. What's this? The light came to rest directly on Desperaux's big ears sticking up from behind the spool of thread. Oh, said Cook, whose ears are those? And the light from the candle then shone full in Desperaux's face. A mouse, said Cook. A mouse in my kitchen. Desperauex closed his eyes. He prepared for his death. He waited, my friends, and waited. And then he heard the sound of laughter. He opened his eyes and looked at Cook. Said Cook, for the first time in my life, I'm glad to see a mouse in my kitchen. Why, she asked. Why am I glad? Oh, because a mouse is not a king's man here to punish me for making soup. That is why. Because a mouse is not a king's man here to take me to the dungeon for owning a spoon. A mouse. I, Cook, am glad to see a mouse. Cook's face was red and her stomach was shaking. She said again. And not just any mouse. A mouse with a needle tied around his waist. A mouse with no tail. Ain't it lovely? She shook her head and wiped at her eyes. Look, Mouse, these are extraordinary times, and because of that we must have some peace between us. I will not ask what you're doing in my kitchen, and you in return will tell no one of what I am cooking. She turned then and went back to the stove and set down the candle and picked up the spoon and again put it in the soup and took it back out and tasted the soup, smacking her lips together. Not right, she said. Not quite right. It's missing something still. Desperauex did not move. He could not move. He was paralyzed by fear. He sat on the kitchen floor. One small tear fell out of his left eye. He expected the cook to kill him. Instead, my friends, she had laughed at him, and he was surprised how much the laughter hurt. Chapter 45. Cook stirred the soup and then put the spoon down and held up the candle and looked over at Desperauex. What are you waiting for? She said. Go, go, go. There will never be another opportunity for a mouse to escape from my kitchen unharmed. The smell of soup again wafted in Desperaux's direction. He put his nose up in the air. His whiskers trembled. Yes, said Cook, that is soup that you're smelling. The princess, not that you would know of or care, is missing. Bless her good-hearted self. And times are terrible. And when times are terrible, soup is the answer. Don't it smell like the answer? Yes, said Desperauex. He nodded. Cook turned away from him. She put the candle down and picked her spoon up and started to stir. Oh, she said, these are dark days. She shook her head. And I'm kidding myself. There ain't no point in making soup unless others eat it. Soup needs another mouth to taste it, another heart to be warmed by it. She stopped stirring. She turned and looked at Desperauex. Mouse, said Cook, would you like some soup? And then, without waiting for an answer, she took a saucer and spooned some soup into it and set it in the floor. Come closer, she said. I don't aim to hurt you, I promise. Desperauex sniffed. The soup smelled wonderful, incredible. Keeping one eye on Cook, he stepped out from behind the spool of thread and he crept closer. Go on, said Cook. Taste it. Despero stepped onto the saucer. Soup covered his paws. He bent his head to breathe the hot broth. He sipped. Oh, it was lovely. Garlic and chicken and watercress, the same soup that Cook had made the day the Queen had died. How is it? Asked Cook anxiously. It's wonderful, said Despero. Too much garlic? Said Cook, wringing her fat hands. No, said Despero. It's perfect. Cook smiled. See, she said, there ain't a body, be it man or mouse, that ain't made better by a little soup. Despero bent his head and sipped again, and Cook stood over him and smiled, saying, It don't need a thing, then. Is that what you're saying? It's just right. Despero nodded. He drank the soup in big, noisy gulps, and when he stepped out of the saucer, his paws were damp and his whiskers were dripping and his stomach was full. Cook said to him, Not done already, are you? Surely you ain't done. You must want more. I can't, said Despero. I don't have time. I'm on my way to the dungeon to save the princess. Ho-ho-ho-hee! Cook laughed. You, a mouse, are going to save the princess. Here we have a picture of Despero sitting in the soup bowl, drinking the soup, talking to the cook. Yes, said Despero, I'm on a quest. Well, don't let me stand in your way. And so it was that Cook held open the door to the dungeon while Despero rolled the spool of thread through it. Good luck, she said to him. Oh-hee! Good luck saving the princess. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it and shook her head. And if that ain't an indicator of what strange days these are, she said to herself, then I don't know what is. Me, Cook, feeding a mouse soup, and then wishing him good luck in saving the princess. Oh my, strange days indeed. And we'll stop there. Wait for the next part to see if Despero can be that knight in shining armor to save the princess, to stop Roscuro and Mary Sal. See you next time.